Hey, welcome to this new episode of The DOORhof is Always Open. I'm sitting in my hotel room backing up all the files I did during Photoshop World 2012 Las Vegas. Now, Photoshop World is a really special trade show. It's actually not a trade show. Of course, there's an expo floor with stuff like Elangram, Manfrotto, Adobe, Wacom. But most of all, Photoshop World is a place of inspiration. Because you all know kelbytraining.com, right? Well, the best instructors of Kelby Training are all teaching at Photoshop World. Now, if you really want to get inspired, you have the pre-cons before the Photoshop World. And then during Photoshop World, you have constant teaching of the greatest instructors on the planet. Think about it: Joe McNally, Jay Maisel, RC, Matt Kloskowski, Scott Kelby. And of course, I also taught some classes at Photoshop World. Now, during Photoshop World 2012 Las Vegas, I decided to do it a little bit differently. And I started asking some friends of me to go into a room with me and give me a 1-minute tip, their killer tip. And it could be a tip about photography, life, Photoshop, Lightroom, or anything they want to talk about. So, in this episode, we're going to show you some of those tips. And trust me, nobody managed to stay within 1 minute. Some tried, and they talk really fast. But nobody really did it in 1 minute. So I hope you enjoy this show. And here we go with the interviews from Photoshop World, Las Vegas 2012. So, hi Moose.
Mr. Frank, how you doing?
I'm doing fine. We're at Photoshop World.
Photoshop World.
You're teaching some amazing classes and showing some amazing pictures, right?
You're too kind. But yes, I'm having a great time. The people at Photoshop World are the best.
Yeah, I know. It's that family feeling, you know.
Oh yeah,
perfect.
oh yeah.
And also the instructors, it's so inspiring. When I go home, I don't even have to fly, you know. I'm already up in the air when I go home.
Yeah. It's the twice a year fix that pumps me up and keeps me going for quite a while. So There's nothing like it. It is the best there is.
Now, when I look at your work, you know, I'm not a landscape photographer, but somehow, and I had the same thing with Jay myself. I was not a street photographer. I met Jay and I was going like, oh wow, I want to be a street photographer. Now I saw some of your landscape stuff and I always was like, I don't like landscapes. And then I saw your slideshow, I think at the first Photoshop World that I attended, it's now 2 years ago. I looked at it and was like, if something like that is possible, I'm going to try the best I can to do it. So get up early, and that's easy when we fly to America because we wake up at 2 a.m. in the morning like it's 8 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, jet lag cheating, huh?
Yeah, jet lag cheating. Is that a real term?
For a lot of people, I say that to them, yeah. Okay. You bet. It's valid. It works.
Now, when you want to start out in landscape photography, of course, the first tip is get the light. That's easy. I don't want to get a tip like that from you. What is the real tip you would give to people about landscape or wildlife or aviation photography? Because you're a real good also aviation photographer, right?
I've been very lucky and fortunate with that. If there's any tip I give them is shoot with the heart. People worry about exposure and they look at histograms or blinkies. Shoot for the heart. They're worried about arranging elements in the frame. Shoot for the heart. As soon as you start capturing memories and you put your heart in that, especially if it's a great memory, you can't help but infect others with it. And it comes out in your photography, which is the whole goal. So you use those things like light and lens and aperture and stuff, but you have to have an emotional stake in that picture. And when you do and you share it, it comes out. And it's something that everybody has a unique passion and heart that they can put in their photograph and use them in their own style. But it's a universal something, just like a smile on a face. It's universal. So is heart in a photograph. For landscapes, I think that's really important. Yeah, telling the story instead of just taking that one picture. Yesterday I had somebody coming up with me. He said, I've done a landscape photo and it's exactly the same as from another famous photographer. And I looked at the picture and it was an amazing picture and I understand why he did it. But I also went to some national parks. And I don't know which park it was, but there was a spot on the floor. Stand here, and there was even an arrow. Point your camera there.
Kodak spots. And I'm like, the Kodak. Are they called Kodak spots?
Oh yeah.
Oh, cool. And I was looking at it and was like, that would be the only reason for me to not stand on that point, to not point my camera that way. I want to do it a little bit differently.
That's very valid. What I tell people is, you want a photograph that doesn't say I was here. You want a photograph that says you need to be here.
Yes.
And while it sounds like it's a slight change in verbiage, getting from that A to B takes a lot of heart.
I think it's the same with fashion photography. The way I look at it, I don't want to sell the clothes. I want to sell a feeling to the people. And I think, and they're now banned, and I hate smoking, by the way, but the smoking commercials, they were really good at it. It wasn't about the brand he was smoking, it was the cowboy.
It was the romance of smoking.
The romance.
Oh, yeah.
I think with photography, and a lot of people forget it, it's too technical and tell the story. So I think that's a killer tip.
So, yeah, you got to learn the photography so well you can forget it, and all you do is think about that story.
Cool. I think that's great for our viewers.
Well, thanks.
I would like to thank you very much, Moose.
And for you, Frank, anytime, any place.
Cool.
You're
any
the
place?
Any place. You're the
Next
best.
week in the Netherlands.
I'm going to be at the races. But after that...
Germany?
No, I would love to get over to do there's some great aircraft from World War II in history in Germany, and from England all the way over. I would love to get there and shoot that history. That is a big-time bucket list.
Okay, then I invite you in our studio and we do a whole episode.
I love it. That's a deal.
Cool.
That's a date.
Thank you very much, Moose.
You bet, Frank. Thank you.
And I'm looking forward to your slideshow at the closing ceremonies.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, and we go to our next tip.
Here we go.
Hey, Pete.
Hey, Frank, how's it going?
Great.
What a surprise meeting you here.
Yeah, it's Photoshop World, and I thought, you know what? I got an invitation, and I was like, what's Photoshop World?
That was a mix-up. That was supposed to go somewhere else.
I'm so sorry for that, but... Hey man, Photoshop World, always great.
Awesome.
And we try to do new stuff. And now I was walking around the corridors and I heard some people were in your class about compositing, and they said, Pete has a whole new system. So I was going into the instructor's room. I was like, Pete, you have to come and tell our viewers about the new system. So tell me a little bit about compositing secrets you have.
Okay, well, I have done a lot of compositing over the years, and I tried to figure out a system that I could talk to people. When you're looking at a composite and you're trying to put one together, oftentimes you'll put something on the image and it sort of works, but you can't figure out why it's not working all the way.
Yeah.
So I wanted to create a system that you could go through a checkpoint and see what are the things that are right or wrong. Because the eye is the perfect inspection device. It's always looking for perfection. And so if you're not taking into account what these four things are when you're doing a composite, it's going to throw up a red flag to your eye. It's going to say something's wrong. Yeah. And those four things are it's the lens system is what I call it. LENS. Lighting. You have to make sure lighting has 2 qualities: color, so it's either warm or cool, those all have to match, and also direction. All your shadows, all your highlights, all your darks have to go in the same direction, or it looks like it's made up. Then you have elevation. That's the perspective lines. Make sure everything fits into perspective and it fits into the scene. Because when you're doing a composite, you're really doing a 3D scene, not a 2D scene.
Yeah.
And so you have to do distance and make sure it fits in that. And then noise. A lot of people forget this. You have one picture that somebody tells you they want you to put in from Facebook on this big 300 DPI image. Well, the only way for them to look right together, low res with the high res, is to add noise to the high res to make it look low res, and then they seem to fit together. Vice versa, if you can get rid of noise, you can do it that way. And the last thing is sharpness. And this is where you're going to spend the most amount of time. Great selections, but then sometimes you make too good of selections. You need to blur the edges so that it will lay down into the picture. And so I go through the steps of that, but it's the 4 things you need to look at. Is the lighting right? Is it perspective or elevation? Is there noise that matches? And is there the right kind of sharpness for that depth of field? And so that's the lens system.
Cool. You know, you guys got me into compositing. I was with Matt and Ems in Nieuwegein, and he showed me on his laptop, and I was like,
say.
yeah, for me. So I was sitting there and I said, I will never do compositing. And he showed me the stuff and I was like, if it's that easy, I'm going to try it. And one of the first things that I found out, and that's cool that you say now, is if I shoot something, let's say with a 50mm, and then in the studio I shoot a model with a 200mm, somehow they don't connect. So now when I'm shooting composites, I'm like, okay, I'm going to shoot this from this angle, because in the studio I will shoot my model from this angle. And I'm already thinking ahead, because now I know, like, we did a great shot below in the parking garage. Mm-hmm. And normally I would shoot it from another perspective, but right. I was like, okay, when I shoot my model in the studio, I will go on this height, I will shoot it with this lens, and I changed it. So it wasn't a normal snapshot anymore. And also my focus point, normally when you shoot wide open, because it was dark, you would focus on the back because it would right. draw your attention to. Now I made 2 shots, one to the back and one on the floor where I will place my model.
Right.
So that's so cool. And I know when I judge portfolios and you see compositing, a lot of the people do this wrong, and it's a dead giveaway. It's okay. It's composite.
The background's too sharp.
Yes, and the model already loses her focus.
Well, and as a photographer, a lot of people, if they're thinking for compositing, take too few photos and only from one angle. One of the best tips I can tell photographers is if you've got an object or a scene, take it low, take it medium, take it high, take it from the right, take it from the left. Then you have the angles that you need to put it together if you're bringing in an object or a model later.
Great tip, Pete. Thank you so very much. And you also have classes on Kelby training about this system soon?
Hopefully I'll have them on there soon.
Yep. Okay, so go to kelbytraining.com and you can see a lot about my friend Pete Collins, and of course all the other great instructors we're interviewing.
We're not really that good of friends though.
We are.
Oh, come on. Oh.
Okay, we'll cut.
Thank you, Frank. No. Keep rolling.
Thanks, Pete.
You're welcome.
Okay, so Richard, we're at Photoshop World, and for my video web podcast, the DOORhof is always open. I'm asking people that I admire, of course, to give a 1-minute tip. And of course, 1-minute tips, they're always a little bit longer.
I'll try my best.
So feel free to come over. Now, you're mostly a video guy.
Yes.
Now, a lot of still photographers at the moment are a little bit afraid to start with video. They say, video, it's okay, but the main problem with video is that it's not stills.
Yeah.
My opinion is in the future, especially when you look at the iPads and all the other interactive media, video is something that's there to stay. Mm-hmm. And when you're working for a newspaper and you have to do a little bit of video and you have to do stills, they have to send you out and you're charged, let's say, 150 euros for a story as a still photographer. They also have sent out a video guy for 150 euros. Now, if you can do it both, yes, if you can do it both. Now, do you have a tip for people who are afraid for that video part? I know people who are saying, I have video on my camera, but I'm never going to use it.
Yeah, I think a lot of folks with video struggle, and I'll give you a couple of quick tips in that same period. First off, a wonderful book called Bruce Block, The Visual Story, is the author. It teaches you to start thinking sequentially. A lot of photographers don't think in a sequence to tell a story, and video is very much a sequential medium. So I think that's an excellent book to help people. He's a UCLA film professor. I'd also say start simple. The current version of Photoshop is a great tool if you want to put together a 2-minute video. It's very straightforward. I have a class on lynda.com. I've got some tutorials that I've put out for free to YouTube. RC and I did one together for YouTube. So it's not that hard to use. And then I would say invest the time in a book. If you truly are a beginner, I have a book called Creating DSLR Video and the Snapshots to Great Shot series, which is for just the enthusiast. And then we have From Still to Motion for people who want to go deeper. But the biggest thing is that audio is half the picture. So great sound, you cannot just, get garbage audio. People won't watch your video. And then focus on sequential storytelling. I tell photographers they have many lenses. Buy a couple of cheap camera bodies. So if you're a Canon shooter, a T2i, a T3i does just as good a video as a 5D in most cases. Yeah. Get a couple more angles set up so that you have some choices. Use everything you know about composition, and instead of just sitting there holding the shaky camera and moving around and chasing the action, put a couple of cameras out in a few places, and then you could tell a story, and it's so much easier.
Yeah, we started out for the video web podcast, we started out with one Steadicam. So one on a tripod, that's the one that's standing there, and one that's mobile that Anurique is now filming with. And again, we do the video podcast really low budget. But you see,
but you have good audio too.
We try to have good audio. It will grow in the future. It will get better and better. But indeed, the 2 camera angles. And the last instructional DVD, for example, I did live in Boston. We filmed with 2 cameras. And sometimes that really saved me, because at one point we forgot to press record on one of the cameras. Yeah. And otherwise that whole segment would have been lost.
And one thing that a lot of people don't realize is that everybody makes mistakes. So the best part in the world is if I'm on this camera and I'm talking and I make a mistake, I don't have to go, oh wait, we'll start all over again. And just be like, hey, this camera, and I just start with the next thought, and you just cut the mistake out.
Yes, correct.
So you can hide it. The last thing real quickly to say is for a lot of photographers, time-lapse is an excellent place to merge your love of still photography and video, and that's easy to do in Photoshop these days too. That lets you do all the beauty of composition and lets you start to explore motion, and that's a lot of fun.
And you can put it up in your hotel room.
Absolutely.
Just run DPP and let your camera take a shot every so much seconds.
Yeah.
Cool, thank you so very much, Richard.
Sure.
And you have a lot to do on Photoshop World, right?
Yeah, I keep busy here, and people can check out my blog at just Richard Harrington blog.
Yeah, and I will be soon on the Photo Focus
webcast.
We're
going to have you as a guest there too.
Cool, thank you so much, Richard.
Thank you.
Okay. Hey guys, we're here with Brad Moore, and a lot of people know Brad as the assistant of Scott Kelby, right?
Yep.
What a lot of people maybe don't know is that Brad is, in my opinion, a really, really good concert photography. I've seen some of his work, and it's like, I don't want to do concert photography anymore. He and Helen Hess, for me, they're absolutely great concert photography.
Well, thank you.
So when I'm going to ask a tip for you, I think it has to be about concert photography, right?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, so tell us a great tip for concert photographers.
Well, one of the things that tricks people up when they first start might be metering. So that metering is, what the camera decides is the right exposure for the scene. And a lot of people will use matrix metering for most of their photography, which works great a lot of the time. But when you're on matrix metering, or rather, if you're a Canon shooter, I don't know what's different about it, but basically matrix metering is it meters for the whole scene.
Yes.
So with concert photography or ballet photography or any sort of like stage photography, theater productions or whatever, a lot of the time the stage background is dark and then there's spotlights on the performers. So whenever you use matrix metering for that, it'll overexpose the performers. They'll be very bright white because it's seeing the big dark hole behind them.
Tries to make it 18% gray.
So what you want to do is move over to spot metering, and then whenever you have your focus cursor that you can move around the scene, the metering will be focused on that. So if I'm focusing on you, on your eye, whatever you are exposed at will be what the camera exposes for.
And then do you also use offset? Because when you use spot metering, it will try to make it 18% gray, of course. Or do you say, I will do that later in Photoshop?
Most of the time, I will do that later in post. I'll take a few test shots and just kind of see how it's looking. And if I feel like it's too dark or too bright, then I'll use exposure compensation. A lot of people shoot in manual mode, so you can use spot metering just to get your first, exposure.
Yeah.
And then, put in your shutter speed, and, of course, you want a low f-stop. Adjust your shutter speed, your ISO, and then you can just shoot the rest of the show. I use aperture priority, but, it's just a matter of preference for that.
So you shoot aperture priority mode personal?
I do.
Yeah, I know Alan shoots a lot of manual, right?
Yes.
Yeah. It's as long as you get the shot, right?
As long as you get the shot.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah,
I think
no
for a lot of concert photographies, this is a great tip.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We're going to try to get some more tips in at Photoshop World. Helen, thank you so very much for joining me. And in this episode of The DOORhof is Always Open, we do quick tips about people I admire, instructors, and of course the people who run everything behind the scenes at Kelby Media and of course now at Photoshop World. Mm-hmm. And I know you're very big on the portfolio reviews. That's your life, I think, right?
I love it. It's a great way to have an impact and to help people expand their horizons and make their life as a creative person a little bit better by helping to give them insight into who they are and what their work is all about.
Yeah, with a lot of portfolio presentations, I always say make sure that you start out with a bang and you end with an even bigger bang. Mm-hmm. Now, I know you have a really great tip for the people about portfolios, so share it with our viewers.
I believe that you have to realize that you define your portfolio. Your portfolio does not define you. And that's a very important issue because you are the creative person, you are the concept and conceptualizing person. So you have to realize that you as an artist, you don't let it define you, you define your work. It represents you. So
it's a real personal way to look at your portfolio and not just throw in the images you think that are great,
exactly.
But the feeling you put in your portfolio.
Exactly. Very important.
Now, let's say I have 40 images online. Mm-hmm. And in my own opinion, I think, 10 are really great, 20 are okay, and the other 10, I love it because it's my cat, it's my dog, it's somebody I love. What's your advice on those?
Get rid of them.
All of them?
No. You pick your best 10 or 15, and one thing you have to remember, your portfolio is only as good as your weakest image.
Yeah, I agree.
I guess we're talking about photography at this point,
yes.
But it's the same thing whether you're a graphic artist, a fine art person, anything you're doing. You're only as good as your weakest link. So you're better off with 10 wonderful pictures than 20 mediocre ones.
And maybe it's also good to let somebody else look at your portfolio because you're personally, I always say it's very hard to kill your own babies. Let somebody else do it.
Oh, that's pretty rough. But
yeah, we're Dutch,
but it's true. It's true.
Yeah.
No, but the truth is, that's what I meant when I said you define your portfolio. You are not defined by it. You can't wear your heart on your sleeve. I need to show you my work to improve it. But if you say this is terrible and that's terrible, you're not saying I'm terrible. That's what I'm talking about. The work may not work, the image may not work, but it doesn't define me as a human being and as an artist. It's one piece of my life of creativity.
Yeah.
And that's the difference. You have to remember that I define myself. My work is just part of it, and it defines what I'm doing. It doesn't define who I am.
I think that's a great tip. And everybody needs a portfolio. So
absolutely.
Thank you so very much for that one.
Thank you for asking.
Thank you. And I already see a good friend of mine sitting there, Dave Black. So I'm now going to do a tip of Dave. And thank you so very much. And when you have time, go through my portfolio. Hey, Dave.
How you doing?
Welcome, man.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Now, this is really a good friend of mine. We hang out in Nieuwegein, and it was amazing. We had professional imaging, and we had a really good time. And Dave does a lot with sports photography, and he does a lot with light painting. Now, of course, I can asks you the simple questions like, okay, Dave, what do you use for light painting? Or what do you use for sports photography? However, I think you've done that so many times it gets boring. So I'm going to pick your brain a little bit in a different way. Now you see him being scared, right?
I know, I'm thinking now.
Now, when you're on a scene, I know how I do it on a scene. I always think about the story, and then immediately my mind goes into overdrive, like composition, light, choose the right angle. I know a lot of photographers, they are still struggling with their gear, like what aperture, what shutter speed, which angle should I choose, and they will just block and make an image that's mediocre. Now, guys like you, when I see your images, like the swimmers, the motocrossers, I'm like, what must be going on in his mind? Now, when you are, let's say, at an Olympic game, you shot a lot of the Olympics.
Sure.
And you can't go up to a sporter and say, hey, you just did a world record, and I was counting on 1/10 of a second less, can you do it again? Now, how do you approach something like that? Let's say you have a swimmer,
Right.
or something that goes even faster, like motocross. How do you plan ahead? How do you know to catch because that's what I like about you, the iconic images. How do you get something like that? What's going on in your mind?
I think one of the sort of issues that comes up especially when you're shooting sports, is a lot of photographers of today's gear, they use the autofocus in order to do this kind of stuff, especially fast action that's coming straight at you or something. Got to use like autofocus. I have to use the autofocus. And I say sometimes, you don't need to use autofocus. It's a very old technique called zone focusing. I can focus on an area, let's say it's motocross. If you say, how do you get the motorcycle to be just right in the frame, exactly in the place that you want it, and maybe even tilting the frame, have them sort of diagonally kind of coming up through it. And I said, I'll just pre-focus on a particular area that's maybe just 3-4 feet in front of me with a wide angle lens, then use the autofocus lock button. So now I don't have to think about trying to keep the autofocus cursor right on the subject. I can devote all my attention to composing the scene as the rider comes through. And instead of having to think of two things to do, I'm now only thinking of one thing to do. That one thing is to making a great picture. I don't have to worry about the focus at all. I know that if I'm using a wide angle lens and I've pre-focused, I know you can see where the motorcycle is coming through, right? These tracks are just continually coming through, and you know he's going to come right through there. I can sit right on the ground. I can pre-focus this on the dirt right there, and when he comes through, I can swing with him and tilt the camera at the same time and give it that dynamic. If I'm trying to concentrate on keeping the focus cursor on him, I'm looking at the focus cursor in the screen, not my subject.
And you lose your focus here.
Exactly.
Oh,
exactly.
That's cool.
And I think that's a good tip. And people, just because you have the technology to do something doesn't mean you have to use it. There are a lot of ways to accomplish things that sometimes help the photographer make a better choice of picture.
What I found out when I teach the workshops, I sometimes also teach to, the sports photographer, but they're it sounds so funny because I'm 41, but I always call them the younger generation sports photographer. And they are like, oh yeah, now we have 12 frames a second. Now we can do this. And I'm like, did you ever see the images that made time like 20 years ago? Those people were shooting film. They were shooting like maybe 3 frames a second or maybe 1 frame, and they could nail it. I think that when I do sports, and I'm a really lousy sports photographer, but when I do sports, I always first start out with not looking through the camera. I will start learning the game. Like when I do soccer, I will first look at, okay, the striker, it's going that way. So he's always making this move. And then maybe after 10 minutes in the game, I will start focusing on one person, which I think is important. And I know that he will go left or right. And I know where to pre-focus the same way you do. And then I try to read the game. And I'm actually sometimes, I'm with my camera with an empty frame waiting, and I see the player coming in and I press. And sometimes they go the other way and I miss the shot.
Sure.
But I think that to read the game, to learn, and in fashion photography, learn the light, learn everything about it, that's one of the most important things. And 12 frames per second, come on, if you can nail it with 3 frames a second, I think you have to start over.
This is a really good point, and I think I'm right with you on this. And by the way, you're a very good sports photographer. I've seen your work. You've got some good sports
Thank you so
images
very
there.
much.
So let's just set the record straight on that. Frank can do sports as well. Okay. I think I am right on par with you there. So often, people just think, well, the way to get good sports action is to shoot 12 frames a second and just let her rip. And something good will be in there someplace. And I come from the school, and yes, I'm older, and it's the older school of thinking, but there's peak moments of action, That's the one frame you really want. You shoot. I hear guys just ripping off, just on every single play of the game. And then you get back in there and you're trying to edit through all this stuff. It's like, forget it, you know. Look for the key moments. If you come to a practice session or you come to the warm-up session before the game starts, athletes tend to do, especially the better the athlete gets, if you go from a high school to a university to a professional, they repeat themselves in all the things they do. They will kick the ball the same way. Their arm position will be exactly the same every time they kick the ball. And you can start predicting what the athlete will look like and the kind of maneuvers that they will do, especially in a lot of the Olympic sports. Their athletes are creatures of habit. If they're a track and field a sprinter, they're getting into the starting blocks. They'll settle into the starting blocks. They'll set their right hand first, then their left hand. Head will go down. They'll look up for a second, take 2 shots. Their head will go back down. They get to here, take another shot, right? If you watch them go through the preliminaries, you will see all these little idiosyncrasies they do. They make beautiful sort of vignette portraits before the start of the race. And then you know whether they're a left arm up as they come out of the blocks. What if they're a right arm up out of the block and they block your view? So you get there early enough, you watch them come out of the starting blocks. These are the 3 or 4 competitors who should be in the running for the gold medal or whatever. And you realize, what side do I need to be on in order to get that picture? Athletes, you think you can't predict sports. You maybe can't predict the outcome of who's going to win or what the score is, but athletes are very, very predictable if you just study them for a little bit.
Learn your subject. Exactly. And that's what I like indeed about your work. For me, it's not, and I said it in Nieuwegein, it's not sports photography, it's iconic images of characters in motion. Yes. And I think that defines the images I see from you. And also Jay Maisel, for example, it's not street photography, it's capturing the history, capturing a character. And I think that's a great tip. And I think people should really listen to this and study their subjects, study their light, and then you know what you're going to do.
I think if there's a time to use 12 frames and 15 frames a second, let's take hurdler, for example, coming over the hurdles. They're at the practice session. Go ahead, let 12 frames go off, and then look back through the pictures and study as they come over the hurdle. When is that perfect point? And you pick out that frame. Okay, that frame looks great. His arms are great. His hand is great. He's looking up. Figure out, look here first. Then when he gets into the final, then you can come back and take 2 shots because you know exactly where that point's going to be. Just coach yourself. Just teach yourself a little bit off the back of your camera there with the LED screen. Then you're ready for the competition itself.
The stupid thing that I had, and I'm a hobby sports photographer, is that when I shoot, and that was still with the 5D Mark II, by the way, so I got 4 frames a second. When I was blasting off 4 frames a second, I would always go through the frames like almost too late. And then when I started shooting like, okay, I'm just going to try to nail it, I got it like, got it, Bingo. Got it, okay, missed it, got it. I got much more keepers.
Sure. This will also help the photographer prepare themselves to use some sort of speed light or off-camera strobe. You're only going to use 1 frame a second then because it takes 2 seconds to recycle the power up. So I'm only going to get 1 shot. So if I practice always taking that 1 shot, that peak moment shot every single time, then I get accustomed to it and I get my timing down. Now I can bring in a strobe. Now I can do a commercial shoot. Bang, here's the guy coming over the hurdles. Bang, get him a good shot. And you get him on that first shot. You go from an editorial point of view of photographing to a commercial job. I don't know what it's like in Europe, but I'd say the difference in the United States is dramatic as far as the kind of money that becomes involved between editorial sales of pictures and commercials, much more. Much better. So you want to try and train yourself to keep moving, forward all the time. I don't have anything against it. You want to be a photojournalist and, maybe just not use lights too much. That's fine. Have at it. But I always try and think of myself, at least every time I go out, as trying to improve everything. Get better, everything. Make a better picture tomorrow than I made today. And just keep working and working and working. Not towards a goal, but just working towards getting better. That is the goal. Yeah. And it's the same for any professional as it is an amateur.
It's the passion for photography, to get better and not just having the frame and go home.
Yeah. There's I always marvel at the way photographers don't go out and practice.
Oh yeah, it's like they only go out if they get paid. And
That's right.
you see that in the images. I think that's the best way also to describe it. If you don't have passion for it anymore, there's one way to earn money in photography, sell your gear. And if you're passionate for it,
Yeah.
you go out every single day. If I don't hear the shutter at least once a day, I go nervous.
Yeah.
I really have to take my pills because then I'm like, where's my camera? I have to hear the shutter. So. Okay, Dave, you overwhelmed us with your wisdom in photography. And I would like to thank you so very much. And you have
welcome.
more
Thanks for
classes on
having
Kelby training?
Yes, I have several on there now. We have light painting and speed lights with high-speed sync action.
I saw the one
and,
with the biker where you went all the way in.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, you really have to see that one. I was sitting
Had a
there
good
on the
time.
couch and I was like,
Good time.
he's gonna get himself killed. And you didn't. He's still here. So
still here.
he did something right. But that was an
worked out
amazing
good.
shot. So on kelbytraining.com, check out my friend Dave Black. And thank you so very much, Dave.
Again, Frank, thanks for having
And
me.
see you next time.
All right, see you guys.
So I'm now joined by Cliff Mautner, and I really have to say I love his work. His work with small flash and natural light is just amazing. You have to really check out his website. And your classes at Photoshop World, they're really well visited, right?
I'd like to think so, but
Yeah.
it depends upon the time of day, I suppose.
Yeah, in the early morning, it's
I wouldn't
Vegas,
get up for
right?
my class at 8 o'clock in the morning.
I would. So now when you have to give a tip to our viewers, and our viewers are a mix between beginner photographers and professionals.
Okay,
And I think you're the right man to give a tip, let's say, about harsh lighting.
I think I can do that. Well,
Cool.
Many years ago, as a wedding photographer, I realized that we can't choose our time of day. Portrait photographer is the same thing. And at times, we're placed in situations that we might not want to be in. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, in the middle of the summer, blazing sun, sometimes we have to do portrait sessions. Well, we can't wait until 5:30 to the golden hour. So instead of running for the open shade, Frank, I learned a long time ago that with a simple methodology, keeping your subject between you and the sun, you can create beautiful images with texture, dimension, mood, without the need of a speed light or reflector or any of those other extraneous items, and produce beautiful dramatic images just by keeping your subject between you and that sun, that light source, and exposing properly. What's properly? Well, expose for the face. We're going to have issues. We're going to have exposure issues with veils if we're shooting a wedding. Maybe shoulders sometimes are going to be a little bit hot. But in my opinion, it's a lot better to give up a little bit and gain so much with the drama that you can create with this harsh light. In other words, what we're doing is taking bad light and making it good light.
I also think that a lot of people are too much pixel peeping, Like, oh no, there's a 255, 255, 255, or 254, whatever you want to call it, in Photoshop. And, oh, there's a lot of pixels missing there. And what you say with the strong backlight, I love it when, for example, something blows out a little bit, as long as the face is right. I did a pre-con, and we had Amanda in front of the window, and she was wearing a white dress. Everything blew out, but her face was perfect. And when I look at the image and you see the nice creamy sun and the lens flares, I go like, wow, that's a great image. And I know that when you're a starting photographer and you put something out online like that, you will be burned. Now, when you're a professional photographer, right, yourself, and you put it online, you're an artist and it's très artistique.
I think it boils down to style.
Yeah.
It's a style that I created for myself. It's a style that I sort of, popularized, if you will. It's not wrong. It's not right. It's my way. And it's a style that I developed because I actually like that harsh light. I would rather use that 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock light than use open shade. I don't like open shade. There's no
it's
texture.
too flat.
There's no texture. And I don't have the time when I'm doing my portrait sessions of brides and grooms to bring out the octagon with the 6 gigawatt generator. I don't have any desire to do that either. So we can create beautiful images with, what used to be considered bad light. And I just make it good light. And forget histograms, forget all this other nonsense, forget the pixel peeping. And remember that it's not the Mona Lisa. We have to remember that too. We're not trying to create the Mona Lisa with, perfect shadows, perfect highlights, perfect everything. There's some compromises that are made, but it still can be a striking image that's graphic, that has meaning, that's, that can move people. in the middle of the day. So that's, don't be afraid of the harsh light.
Cool. I think that's one of the best tips because a lot of people are afraid of it. So, thank you very much, Cliff.
My pleasure.
And I will make sure to catch one of your classes.
Keep the door open, man. I'll keep the door open for you.
Cool. Thank you so very much,
No
Cliff.
problem.
Have a great Photoshop world.
Thank you very much.
Hey, Dave.
Hey, Frank.
So, welcome at Photoshop World and at our filming for The DOORhof is Always Open. Now, in this episode, I have a lot of the instructors coming in and giving us 1 minute. Yeah.
Yeah, good luck with that.
Nobody got it between 1 minute. 1 minute tips about, it could be about life or photography. And now, one of my mottos, and I know we don't agree per se on that, is why fake it when you can create it? In other words, my opinion is do everything in camera. Right. And I don't mean Photoshop in camera or like you do with the iPhone Snapseed, but try to create the scene, try to create your light, get your exposure correct, get your color correct, and then in Photoshop just finish it up.
Right.
Now, I think you have a different opinion about that.
I do, but I first say that I agree completely in that for the most part, why not take advantage of the camera and capture what you want? That makes sense to do that. But the approach I like to suggest to people is also consider there are some things that you just couldn't do easily. For example, plan to take someone leaning against a wall, but leave all this wall so you can put another shot of them as like a profile or something, which I suppose you could do in camera through double exposures, but that's where it would be easier to use Photoshop. So my approach is to consider, on some occasions, take your photographs with the intent of doing something in Photoshop. To say, okay, I almost look through the viewfinder and go, okay, this would be my background layer, and then when I take this second shot, that would be on this side, and I'm kind of imagining the layers panel in my head so that when I do decide to put it together, so it doesn't take very long in Photoshop, because I still don't want people to spend hours on a project. So my thinking is if you plan it out so that when you take the shots, it's pretty much easier to put it together in Photoshop because you've already kind of thought it out in advance.
But then actually we are on the same level. Because I also say, why fake it when you can create it? And that's what you do, and you're already thinking about. And I think a lot of people nowadays are thinking, we'll just fix it in Photoshop. And I see on forums, like they have a really popular style. Let's call it the Mr. X style. And Mr. X uses 3 light setups, and always the same 3 light setups. And probably you know who I mean. And then they do a certain filtering over it, and you get a perfect look. Now, I see a lot of people posting images online with only 1 light. And where's the magic to get from this to this? And this is planning ahead. And of course, when you say, I'm already thinking in layers, I think we're not that far apart because although I don't do a lot in Photoshop, I do the same thing because I think about my finished product.
Right. And I think that's really the key. Is I just taught a class the other day here at Photoshop World and was talking about, the class was actually called Habits of Successful Photoshop Users. And one of the things I always tell people is think backwards. Think about the end result you want to achieve, and then how can you make your life easier by the way you started? Because I think a lot of people jump in and they get partway down and go, oh, this isn't working. But if you kind of think, I need to end up with it looking like this, I'll shoot it this way in the camera, and then I'll take this approach in Photoshop just to make everything easier. And I think a lot of people, the mistake they make is, like in your example, they see something, go, well, I don't have that same setup, so I'll try and achieve it somehow later in Photoshop, where realistically, it's just not going to happen.
The magic Photoshop filter.
Right, exactly, the fix everything, which really doesn't happen. So I think that approach of think backwards and kind of plan ahead, it still means you're doing as much as you can in the camera. I have one expression I use, a lot of people say, get it right in the camera. I say get it the way you like in the camera, which is very close to it, but it's like, that means be prepared that you may have to do a little bit more in Photoshop, but at least you're getting it as close as you can to right in the camera.
Cool, I think that's a very good tip. So always get it as much as you can in the camera.
Exactly. Yep.
Why fake it when you can almost create it?
Most of it.
We agree on that one?
Yes, definitely.
Okay. Thank you so very much,
pleasure,
Dave.
Frank.